Hey guys, welcome back to the course. In this lecture, we're going to deconstruct what exactly a website is and what goes into it. You might think this is obvious, but to the vast majority of human beings on the planet, it's actually not. A basic understanding of how a website is structured and operated will save you a whole lot of confusion down the road if you decide you want to learn more about programming, and if not, it'll at least help you understand what developers are always complaining about. So what do we know so far? We have clients, usually your computer, and then we have servers, the place where the information you want resides. You want that information? Okay, you tell your browser, which is just a software program that can interpret websites into a way that our puny brains can understand, and then you go to X domain and it takes you to that website. Okay, but what is it actually grabbing?
Did you just grab my ass?
Well, you remember what I said about web code and also what code essentially is? Code, if you already forgot, is just instructions a machine can understand and act on. Web code is the way that one instructs a browser on what to show for a website. Well, believe it or not, a website is actually just a big set of files. Go to your desktop right now and open a new folder and just follow along. So it's just a bunch of files, right? What kind of files, you might ask? Well, it is quite literally just a bunch of text files. If you have a folder, you saved a bunch of papers you wrote for school, or emails you backed up, or notes you took for yourself, that group of files really isn't that much different than what a website is. When you just went to your desktop and clicked on that folder, that's effectively what a browser does. I say, hey browser, go to evankimbrell.com, and it gets the IP address, finds that server, and then it opens the folder on the server that holds my website. In that folder, a website looks more often than not virtually the same. It'll have one text file that usually ends in .html, or it could be something like .php or .py. That file is usually the first file that your browser will grab, open up, and then display back to you. Go to the homepage of any website, okay? What are you looking at? Well, you are probably just loading the .html file that is in the first folder that your browser opens up. Most often this is called index.html. Again, it could have different suffixes, but it's almost always like this. Index, by the way, it's just a short trick that developers use. So if you, for instance, took a file and then called it index.something, and then you told a browser to go open it or access it, what ends up happening is your URL will look more clean. And so it will have the backslash, but then it won't say index whatever it is. And then also when a browser goes to a folder, it sees index and immediately goes and opens that. Okay, so websites, they're just a bunch of text files hanging out. Cool. Your browser finds that folder of text files and naturally just navigates to the index.html file. HTML stands for the type of language that exists in that text document. Don't really worry about this stuff because we're going to talk all about it later. You'll know exactly what HTML is and what it isn't. Right now, you just need to know that the suffix tells the browser up front, hey, this is what the language is going to be. It basically saves itself some work. Okay, so every website has its own folder, and it's gonna have this essentially like a front file. So what else is in there besides the index file? Most likely, you'll have another file that's gonna be labeled something like .css. CSS is another language we're gonna cover later. Again, don't think about the details too much. All you need to know here is that the .html file is actually the main instruction for what your browser should show you. That folder is going to tell it where the images are, how big the text should be, what's the color of this, and what is the font for that. That main instruction file will reference the other files in the folder, and your browser, knowing this because it can read the instructions, will then go and access them as well when appropriate. So that .css file, it just can change a bunch of instructions on the style of the website. It'll generally say things like, how much white space should I put in between the words or over on the side of the screen? What margins should I use around images? It might say what font this should be, and it might say things like where things should be aligned. The pair of these two are a pretty powerful duo for giving someone control over their website. Okay, what else might we find in this folder? Well, you might find what's called a backend script. Trust me, we're gonna learn all about this stuff later, almost have a half section on it, so don't try to overwhelm yourself now. All you need to know is that that .html file and the .css, really what those two do is just say what the site should look like. It doesn't dictate what the site can do. The backend file, on the other hand, can. The backend file contains yet another programming language that's designed essentially to add functionality to the website. Say I'm at a website and my browser's opened the website's .html file. In that .html, that index file, we have instructions to display a form. It's written in there, it says go and open a form. When I submit that form, it should get saved somewhere or maybe spit some information back at me. Well, the .html and the .css file aren't gonna do that because, well, and we'll learn this later, they can't. That's not what they're actually made for or meant to do. But luckily, the backend file can, because that's what backend files are designed to do. We'll talk about the term backend later, but an easy way of thinking about it right now is that backend files contain instructions that will happen behind what you can actually see, behind the curtain, so to speak. It is a whole lot of unappreciated work that doesn't necessarily show itself or always make itself obvious. These files, again, might end in a .php or a .py or a .rb. Okay, so that's the main trio that makes up a website. One acts as that main set of instructions that's gonna get read first, and that refers to other files and asks your browser at certain times to go and read those other files, which it does. The .css file helps out with making the site look good and correct, and the backend file gives instructions on how to operate, get information, make calculations behind the scenes. There are, of course, a million other potential files, but this is the most basic understanding. Outside of those three files, you'll probably see a folder named images, or IMG for short, and that's where the browser gets the images to display on screen. It might also just ask the browser to go get images elsewhere, and that's generally a process that takes longer. So most of the time when it can be done, we'll find all the images the website has in that folder. Okay, but what happens if the browser wants to click on a link and go to a different page on the same website? Well, it actually just goes to another folder in that folder. And that folder structure probably looks like, well, can you guess it? It actually looks the exact same as that original folder. Okay, let's run through this just to test it out. Go to a different tab, and then go to facebook.com. If you are not on Facebook, then I guess you can get a partial refund for this lecture. When you first load the page, you're gonna be looking at the index file in the first folder that your browser finds. Now, you click on your profile and you go to a different page. So in my case, I'd be clicking on my face, and that would take me to a different folder. In fact, that folder is effectively called Evan Kimbrell. It's my folder. Upon doing that, it sees yet another .html page, or in the case of Facebook, a .php page, which will then have its own backend file, CSS file, and set of images associated with it, reads that, and that is how we move on to the next page. In the next lecture, we're gonna jump into a website and start playing around with it so you can see a little bit about what I'm talking about. All right, guys, see you then.